Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010. This is the summer 2019 session, and in this second video we'll be going over Buddhism. So this is our textbook, Introduction to World Philosophy, a multicultural reader. In the previous video I went over the Upanishads, and in doing so I went over a few of our potential exam 1 questions, so it was part A. Number 1, compare the Buddhist view of anatman to the Hindu conception found in the Upanishads. So we went over the Upanishads. In this video, we'll be going over the Buddhist view of anatman. And we will also be going over question number 2, part A. In what ways are Madhava's materialist philosophy, as presented in Compendium of Philosophy, similar to and different from the Buddhist philosophy presented in the various Buddhist texts we read, Indian and Chinese? So the materialist philosophy, as a prelude, is similar to the Buddhist philosophy in that both of those philosophies say there is no soul, no Atman. We saw the Hindu conception, and Hindu is a word that came after the Muslim conquerors, and it was upheld by the British. It's not a word originally attributed to the philosophy of the Vedanta or the Vedic texts. This is Hinduism. It's based on the Vedas. The original texts are the Vedas, and then added to the Vedas were the Upanishads, kind of explanatory stories, dialogues in which people have philosophical conversations. So in that part of Hinduism, there's a belief in an eternal soul that lives after the body dies, and it either continues to reincarnate from one material body to the next based on its desires of its previous life, or if it can focus itself on the supreme soul, the supreme Atman, who is also Brahman. Atman, I pointed out, is the individual, personal, perceiving Purusha, the personified everything. And then the other side of that is Brahman, this ocean of impersonal potential for everything to exist. So it's Atman and Brahman. They are flip sides of the same being. There's the supreme Atman, Vishnu, and then all of the other subordinate Atmans, people like you and me, we're little parts and parcels of that supreme Atman. So we talked all about that, and we'll be going over it a little bit more when we compare it to Buddhism. So I'll just get into the Buddhist texts that we'll be covering. So we'll be covering one Indian Buddhist text, the story of King Milinda, questions to King Milinda, and then we'll be going over a couple of Chinese Buddhist texts, and then I'll compare them to the Upanishads, and then we'll compare Buddhism to Madhava's materialist philosophy. So on page 224 of our text book, questions to King Milinda. So King Milinda was the Greek king. Menander was his name in Greek, and I guess he was known as Milinda by the people in Bactria. So this would be a town, I believe, in present-day Afghanistan. It was where the Greeks, after Alexander the Great, had invaded India and then retreated back. He maintained this outpost in Bactria where the people were Buddhists. So they had been previously Hindus. Buddha was a Hindu. He initiated the religion of Buddhism by rejecting the Hindu belief in Atman, the individual self. So now King Milinda, the Greek king, speaking to the great monk Nagasena, and they come into some kind of an arena to have a showdown in philosophy. And so King Milinda asked the monk Nagasena, "How is your reverence known, and what is your name, sir?" "As Nagasena I am known, O great king, and as Nagasena do my fellow monks habitually address me. But although parents give a name such as Nagasena, nevertheless this word Nagasena is just a denomination, a designation, a conceptual term, a temporary appellation, a mere name. There is no real person here to be apprehended." So his point is there is no individual self. And the argument will explain that a self should be a unified, unchanging thing that endures the same with itself from moment to moment. That's what a self is. If you're the same self one moment as you are the next. That's what you would have to have, this unchanging, single, non-composite, not made of parts, just a complete unity. And that is something that we don't perceive. So although we can create a name such as myself, that's one word, it would seem to imply it refers to one unchanging thing. Nagasena says, no, that's not how it works. It is a word that seems to imply there is one unchanging thing, but in fact there is no one unchanging thing. So King Milinda acts a little shocked. He says, now listen, you 500 Greeks and 80,000 monks. So there's 80,000 Buddhists there and 500 Greeks at this Bactria outpost of the Greek civilization. This Nagasena tells me that he is not a real person. How can I be expected to agree with that? And to Nagasena he said, if, most reverend Nagasena, no person can be apprehended in reality, when then, I ask you, gives you what, who then, I ask you, gives you what you need by way of robes, food, lodging, and medicines? You know, who is guilty of murder? No one is there to murder anyone, and there is no one who is murdered. So me as the king, I shouldn't have to be policing the murderers. I shouldn't have to be providing the medicines for the sick, because there's no one who's there to be sick or anyone to give the medicine to those sick. If no one exists, that's his point. So then the king asks Nagasena, he says, or perhaps, you know, he says, is your hair, Nagasena? Are the nails, teeth, skin, muscles, sinews, bones, marrows, kidneys, heart, all these parts of you, are they Nagasena? Is your body Nagasena? Or is Nagasena a form or feeling or perceptions or impulses or consciousness? No, great king. Then is it the combination of form, feelings, perceptions, impulses? You know, is it your mind? Is it your body? Is it the combination of the two? No, 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 he says. And then this is always a strange part of the dialogue that I point out. He says, then ask as I may, I can discover no Nagasena at all. This Nagasena is just a mere sound. But who is the real Nagasena? Your reverence has told me a lie. He has spoken a falsehood. There is really no Nagasena. I get confused because that's what Nagasena was saying at the beginning. And originally the king rejected that. And now here at the end, he's saying Nagasena lied by saying that he is Nagasena. So that's confusing to me. I don't understand it. But Nagasena plays back now, and now it's his turn. Here it goes on page 225 in the left-hand column. Thereupon the venerable Nagasena said to King Milinda, as a king you have been brought up in great refinement, and you avoid roughness of any kind. If you would walk at midday on this hot, burning, and sandy ground, then your feet would have to tread on the rough and gritty gravel and pebbles, and they would hurt you. Your body would get tired, your mind impaired, and your awareness of your body would be associated with pain. How then did you come, on foot or on a mount? So he just insults the king. He's saying you're weak, you've been coddled your whole life, your wimpy little feet, they can't walk. So it's just setting the tone for Nagasena's rebuttal. And he's saying, since you can't walk on the ground, you must have come in a chariot. So then the king says, yes, I came in a chariot. And then, so then Nagasena says, if you've come on a chariot, then please explain to me what a chariot is. Is the pole the chariot? No. Is the axle the chariot? No. The flagstaff, the yoke, the reins, the goad stick. Is it the combination of all these parts? No. Then ask as I may, I can discover no chariot at all. The chariot is just a mere sound. But what is the real chariot? Your majesty has told a lie, has spoken a falsehood. There is really no chariot. All right, so the point is, the word chariot is one word, but what it refers to is an assemblage of parts. A wheel, wheels, axles, all the things that go into making a chariot. They are temporarily put together at a certain point in time, and they inevitably fall apart. And if you analyze it even more carefully, the atoms of which they're made are constantly changing. Nothing stays the same from one moment to the next. And everything seems to be a combination of many individual, separate things. But a self is supposed to be one unified, enduring, unchanging entity. That's what Atman is in the Hindu philosophy. So Nagasena, the Buddhist, is saying, where is that? Where is this unchanging self? It's just a word. There's no Nagasena, there's no chariot, there's no anything that endures from one moment to the next. Everything is in constant flux. And the idea that we are a continuous individual self that lives and hopes for eternity just imprisons us more and more in the false identification of ourselves as some enduring self. There is no eternal self, but Buddhists do believe in reincarnation. What's reincarnating? The very delusion, the painful delusion that I exist, it perpetuates itself until you can learn to stop identifying yourself as a self. There is no self. And what is there if there is no self? No words would be able to tell you. All words are implying that individual things exist. Chariot. There's innumerable chariots, but there's only one word, chariot. It kind of activates the illusion that there are these enduring individual things, and that's what you're trying to escape from the Buddhist perspective. There is no individual self. That's the main point. So continuing here, page 225 of the right-hand column, down at the bottom, personal identity and rebirth. The king asked, when someone is reborn, Venerable Nagasena, is he the same as the one who just died, or is he another? The elder replied, he is neither the same nor another. Give me an illustration. What do you think, great king? When you were a tiny infant, newly born and quite soft, were you then the same as the one who is now grown up? No, that infant was one, I, now grown up, am another. If that is so, then, great king, you have had no mother, no father, no reading, no schooling. Do we then take it that there is one mother for the embryo in the first stage, another for the second stage, another for the third, and so on? Certainly not. So there's one illustration. You're changing constantly. You're not the same person as when you were a newborn infant, and you're not the same person as you were when you were 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old. Well, some of you aren't even 20 yet, but the point is you're constantly changing day by day. It's obvious when you go in increments of 5 years. So if you're not the same person, does that mean you don't have the same mother? Well, no, I still have the same mother. Well, how can you if you're not the same person that she gave birth to? So similarly, in the next life, is that reincarnated person still you? And the Buddhist answer is, it's neither the same nor another, because there never was a person to begin with. There's this ever-changing conglomeration of karmic reactions that are perpetuated by the illusion of I exist, and it continues to swirl in this painful cycle of desire and frustration until the moment of enlightenment, when the illusion of I realizes it's an illusion and then dissolves into some blissful nirvana. But how can it be blissful if there's no individual ego to experience it? That's not easy for me to understand, and the Buddhists generally don't try to explain it, because using words is inherently anti-Buddhist, in the sense that words imply individual things exist, like a noun, a thing, a person, or a place. An enduring thing or person or place doesn't exist according to Buddhism. There is no enduring unit of anything. There is no Atman, as the Buddhists said. Another example uses is the flame on a candle. Is it the same flame at the beginning of the night watch burning on that candle as at the end? No, the flame is constantly changing. It seems to be the same, but it's actually never the same from one moment to the next. And milk changes from milk to butter to ghee, which is clarified butter, boiling butter and skimming off the top. It's all the same ingredient, but it's constantly changing. So Buddhism says things are constantly changing. There is no enduring self. There is no Atman. That was the Indian Buddhist perspective. And now I'm going to turn to the self in Chinese Buddhism in chapter 8 of our book. The first one I'm going to read, and not in as much detail as the story of King Milinda, which I think is easier to understand. It's a great introductory text to Buddhist philosophy. This one I'm less familiar with, and it's also a little more technical. It is the Shuang Zhang. Now, I hope I am pronouncing that well enough. I listened on Google to how to pronounce it. I couldn't even make the sound that the lady was making, but basically this is the text. Let me go back here and see if I can look at what I'm presenting here. So here's the text, and it's this text right here. on page 238. Xuanzang from the Treatise on the Establishment of the Doctrine of Consciousness Only. So, some of these readings in our textbook I'm very familiar with, others not so much. Again, this is the second time I've used this textbook in this class. We used another book for the previous 5.5 years that I've been teaching. And so if I misrepresent one of the more detailed nuances of this Chinese Buddhist philosophy, I apologize. But for our introductory class, I'm going to be presenting what is sufficient for exam question. Part A, number 1, compare the Buddhist view of anatman to the Hindu conception found in the Upanishads. Okay, so Xuanzang, he's attacking this idea of a unified self, Atman. He says, if you look on page 237 in the introductory notes by the authors, down near the bottom, the second to last paragraph, Xuanzang critiques theories of the self that treat it as unified. Where is this unified self? There are only 3 possible answers. It may be universal, as extensive as empty space, that is existing outside the bounds of any particular body. 2, it may be coextensive with the body. 3, or it may be within the body. So we're going to go back and look at the Buddhist texts in the different Upanishads, not the Buddhist texts, the Hindu texts. In the different Hindu Upanishads, all 3 of those explanations of the self are provided. It is as extensive as empty space, the ether, but the ether contains everything within it. It's also located within the body. It's coextensive with the body, and it's a smallest point within the heart. So all 3 of those answers, Xuanzang is analyzing them and saying they are illogical. It doesn't make sense. And so continuing on page 237, the next paragraph says, suppose that the self or soul is transcendental, existing outside the bounds of any particular body. Then its interaction with the body becomes inexplicable, and we lack any compelling way to individuate selves. So here's what he's saying. Is the soul the ether sphere? Then how does it have contact with the material body? Where's the point of contact between the two? The soul must be within the body to move it, he's saying. If you're saying it's outside of the body, like the encompassing sphere of space, then you can't explain how your soul can make your body move. And furthermore, you can't individuate different souls in different people. I'm giving this video, you're watching it, but if there's only one universal soul, then how come I have different karma from you? This idea of a soul existing in the universal space and not attached to the body fails for those 2 reasons. And then he says, if, and at the bottom of page 237, moreover, if the soul is coextensive with the body, it is divisible. But how then can it be one self? So, okay, it's not in outer space. Your soul permeates your whole body. Well, if it permeates your whole body, it's in your arm, it's in your head, it's in your leg, it's in your hair. What if you cut off your hair? What if your arm gets cut off? It would seem then that a part of yourself was cut off. And if yourself is extended in space, then you can divide the self. It's not this unified thing, it's a composite thing. So says his argument. And if there's no unity, there's no self. A self has to be an indivisible, non-composite, made of no parts, this indivisible, constantly enduring, always the same with itself, or there is no self. On page 238, he says, to summarize these arguments, if mind is separate from body, it cannot interact with the body. If mind is part or whole of the body, it lacks unity, and there is no self. So those are his arguments. And now we'll look to the text itself by Xuanzang from the Treatise on the Establishment of the Doctrine of Consciousness Only. So he's saying all there is consciousness. What appears to be matter is just a transformation of consciousness. But consciousness, although Buddhists do believe in consciousness, they don't believe in any individual consciousness. That is it is as illusory as individual rocks and trees. All individual enduring things or persons are illusions. So on page 239, on the left-hand column near the top, he says, Why is the real self impossible? Theories of the self held by the various schools may be reduced to three kinds. We went over these, I'll read them again. The first holds that the substance of the self is eternal, universal, and as extensive as empty space. That refers to the ether that we were talking about in the Upanishads in the previous video. It acts anywhere and as a consequence enjoys happiness or suffers sorrow. It acts anywhere. All right. The second holds that although the substance of the self is eternal, its extension is indeterminate because it expands or contracts according to the size of the body. You can see that in the Upanishad on page 212. That theory of the soul is mentioned there. And the third holds that the substance of the self is eternal and infinitesimal like an atom, lying deeply and moving around within the body and thus acts. So the Upanishads say that too. Smaller than the mustard seed, the Atman is in your heart, and yet somehow it occupies your whole body. But if it does that, it's moving. And if it's moving, according to Xuanzang's logic, it's changing. And if it's changing, it's not the same unitary being, and so there is no self. So those theories of what a self is are presented in the Upanishads, which we went over in the previous video. And now he's rejecting that idea. So I'll read a little bit more of his explanation for why it doesn't work on page 239, the next paragraph on the left-hand column. First, theory is contrary to reason, the idea of the soul being the ether. Why? If it is held that the self is eternal, universal, and as extensive as empty space, it should not enjoy happiness or suffer sorrow along with the body. Furthermore, being eternal and universal, it should be motionless. How can it act along with the body? Again, is the self so conceived that the same or different among all sentient beings? Is the self so conceived, meaning being this universal, the ether of the cosmos, if you conceive of the self that way, is it the same or different among all sentient beings? So if that's what the soul really is, one with this outermost ether sphere, then how do you account for the fact that all the individual living beings have their own ideas of what a self should be? It doesn't make sense. He's saying, if it is different, then the cells of all sentient beings would universally penetrate one another, and their substance would be mixed. And since the field of abode of all selves is the same, the acts of one being or the fruits of action received by him should be the act or fruits of all beings. How do you account for individual people with individual karma? Karma is the moral idea of action and reaction. If I commit a good action, kindness towards someone, then kindness comes back to me, and vice versa. So if we all have different karmas, this idea of the universal soul in which we're all one doesn't make logical sense, because one soul, yet it has all these different karmic reactions. That doesn't make sense. So says Xuanzang. So the question is, which do you think makes more sense? The Buddhist rejection of Atman, or the Hindu philosophy of Atman? I'll give you one hint about how you could possibly respond to Xuanzang's objections to the rationality of this idea of a universal soul. We saw that in the ether of the Upanishads. One way is Blaise Pascal, a Catholic theologian, 17th century mathematician also. He says, oh, you want to know how God can be extended throughout space and yet indivisible? How God can be one indivisible unit and unchanging, and yet also omnipresent without being subjected to being segmented and divided into sections? How is that possible? He says, I'll show you, it's easy. A point moving everywhere infinitely fast. So an infinitesimal point, which can't be divided because it has no extension in space, and yet it travels everywhere infinitely fast, which means it would be at each point simultaneously an infinitely accumulating number of times at each instant. And it would unite the opposites of infinite speed and motionlessness. Because by moving infinitely fast, it takes no time to move from point A to point B. You be at every point in between simultaneously. So once you throw infinity into the mix, you can answer these seemingly impossible objections that Xuanzang is presenting. And another way that the Hindus might respond is saying, well, all of the individual Atmans are part and parcel of one supreme Atman. So And this whole world is the dream of that Atman. We saw in the Katha Upanishad, in various Upanishads, the idea of this is God's dream is talked about. I'm going to stick to the Buddhists for now, and then we can go back and look at the Upanishad text. But if we are part of one supreme person, then it's kind of like, well, we have one consciousness, and yet that consciousness, although indivisible physically, there are many thoughts. But if those thoughts are changing, the Buddhists would say, then that's not the kind of an eternal self that you're talking about. But if the thoughts aren't changing, then that would satisfy their rejections. If you look on page 240, Xuanzang says, again on the left-hand column near the top, does the substance of the real self conceived by the various schools think or not? If it does, it would not be eternal, because it does not think all the time. If it does not think, it would be like empty space, that's the ether, which neither acts nor receives fruits of action. Therefore, on the basis of reason, the self conceived by the theory cannot be established. We're going to see David Hume make the same point, that if you have an idea of a self as being the same from moment to moment, then the only way you could have that would be if you had all of the thoughts of your entire life, past, present, and future, simultaneously in front of your eye at one unchanging moment. Then, okay, that's a self. But since we don't experience that, says David Hume, the British empiricist, who's very similar to this Buddhist perspective, except for he doesn't talk about reincarnation. I mention that because this is discussion question 1. Compare the Buddhist Humean view to the Hindu Platonic view. Plato and the Hindus, very similar philosophy of a reincarnating soul. David Hume and the Buddhists reject the idea. David Hume also talks about empiricism, which we'll be talking about when we compare this Chinese Buddhism to Indian materialism. But at any rate, the ether sphere described in the Upanishads, that's where the past, the present, and the future coexist. And the interior of the universe is radiating in from that outermost sphere like a dream. So, and I talked about Leonard Susskind's holographic string theory. He said, and he defeated Stephen Hawking, the great physicist Stephen Hawking, who died last year. So Leonard Susskind, this string theorist from Stanford University, he says, the past, the present, and the future are interwoven by these fundamental threads of energy at the horizon of the cosmos, where space is expanding at the speed of light. Past, present, and future are there, they radiate inward. I also talked about near-death experiences. The Katha Upanishad was a near-death experience by the Brahmin boy Nachiketa. And we talked about, in that dialogue, the Katha Upanishad, they talk about these different layers. If you take the chariot of your body drawn by the horses of your senses towards the outermost sphere, you'll find the highest goal of life, which is Vishnu, the Supreme Person. That Supreme Person, the other Upanishads, is interwoven with the ether. And we went over that in the previous video, so you'll need to go back and look at that video to find these comparisons. So that would be an answer to Xuanzang. It's like, it appears to think, and yet all of the thoughts are simultaneously present out at that outermost sphere. And these near-death experiences, that's what people recall. My whole life flashed before my eyes, they say. Out at these, I'm hurtling through space towards this brilliant point of light at the end of a dark tunnel. That is what the theory of relativity theory, special relativity, and general relativity say. If you traveled near the speed of light, all of the light in the universe, even the light from behind you, would be condensed into a single point at the end of a dark tunnel, and it would contain the past, present, and future of the whole universe. That's what people say they experience when their heart stops. They rise out of their body, and then their heart starts again, and they come back. That's Carl Jung, the psychologist, Eben Alexander, the neurosurgeon from Harvard. I talked about that in the previous video. So there are ways to answer Xuanzang's and David Hume's apparently unanswerable objections to the Atman theory. So for the exam, this is an introductory class, so I'm just looking for a rudimentary understanding, an introductory understanding of the basic Buddhist and Hindu philosophies. Do you think the Hindus and the Upanishads made a better argument that we are all a part of the Supreme Atman, who's also one with Brahman? Was that a better argument, or did the Buddhists provide a better argument? And we haven't finished with the Buddhists yet. We're coming across one of my favorite Buddhist texts. And, well, first I'm going to go over Tibetan Buddhism very quickly because it's so much information. On page 242, my favorite one in this book is the Zen Buddhist text where the monks are beating each other with swatters. We'll get to that, but for right now, on page 242, this is Tibetan Buddhism, Yeshe Tsogyal, from Autobiography. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but there is the text that I'm going to very briefly go over. And this is an interesting point that we're going to need to contrast with the materialist philosophy. So, if you look on the right-hand column on page 242, so Yeshe Tsogyal, I believe this is a woman, she says, vision is but a quality of all meditative existence, yet absorbed in reality, experiencing its nature, you find no mere emptiness, for there is awareness and radiance, yet nothing permanent, for all is intrinsically empty. That essential insight is called vision. What are the modes of vision? In the creative mode, it is the deity. When you practice radiation and reabsorption, it is compassion. When you practice the fulfillment process, it is Mahamudra, direct access to the nature of experience, the essence without permanence or flux. Turn your eyes inward upon your own reality and you see yourself, but you see nothing. That visionary perception in itself, that is what is designated vision. So the Buddhists they believe in a spiritual energy, but it's not personified. It has no individuality. It doesn't even have non-individuality. Whatever it is beyond conceptual comprehension. But one thing that they're insistent on is that there's no eternal person involved, which is against what the Hindus say. Each of us is an eternal individual soul, and we're all part and parcel of the Supreme Soul, Atman, who's one with Brahman. There is a God, an omniscient, all-knowing God who cares about you as your friend. Like one of the images from the Upanishads was there's two birds on the tree. One eats the fruit and the other just watches. So the bird eating the fruit is the individual soul reincarnating through material bodies who's infatuated with material sense pleasure. The other bird is the Supreme Atman just watching, saying, oh, interesting, you're falling for this dream as if it's real. But if the bird who's eating the fruits of karma looks over at the partner bird, then all of a sudden all of those material desires dissolve and the reunion with God is there, but the personal relationship still exists. That is not the case in Buddhism. If you look on page 243 in the right-hand column, I have vanished into fields of lotus light, the plenum of dynamic space. To be born in the inner sanctum of an immaculate lotus. Do not despair. Have faith when you have withdrawn attachment to this rocky defile, this barbaric Tibet full of war and strife. Abandon unnecessary activity and rely on solitude. A little lower down, she says, disabuse yourself of fantasies of eternity. Make your life a practice of sadhana, spiritual practice, and cultivate the experience that takes you to the place where ati, the highest form of yoga, ends. So the main point from that Tibetan Buddhist document is that the Buddhists are trying to dissolve their individuality, but not into an empty, meaningless, mechanical void, but rather into some kind of a wonderful consciousness that has no personal awareness of itself. That's what they're saying. So it's not that different from Hinduism. It's more like the Buddhists accept the idea of Brahman, but they reject the idea of Atman. Yeah, there is Brahman, an impersonal ocean of potential being that's filled with bliss and knowledge, but the knowledge has no individual cognition until it manifests as Atman, the individual knower, the Purusha or Vishnu. Buddhists say no Atman, but there is this nirvana, which is... all right, so on to Zen Buddhism. So the Zen Buddhists talk about the lightning path, how to quicken the process of transmigration to get you out of the cycle of reincarnation more quickly. Sometimes you need to use more severe methods. So I like this because the Buddhists say, well, like we saw Nagasena talking to King Milinda, Nagasena is just a name, it's a word, it's an appellation. Really, there is no individual self. Words can distract us. So if words distract us, then using all these words to describe Buddhism is in some ways counterproductive. And it seems the Zen Buddhist monks in this reading the Heart Sutra. Oh no, that's not the one. I'm gonna skip that one for now, and I'm gonna go to the recorded conversation of Zen Master Yi Xuan. So this one.